Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few feel who you really are. Niccolò Machiavelli. Welcome to the cycle, the mechanics of self-control. Before we proceed to the analysis of the first critical error in evaluating others, allow me to clarify the foundation of our work. True strength is not the absence of feelings, nor an attempt to turn oneself into a lifeless stone. It is the ability to build a distance between impulse and action. In this cycle, we will not learn to hate or fear. We will learn to classify. When you understand the mechanics of someone else's behavior, fear disappears, giving way to pure calculation. We will analyze 3 signs by which Machiavelli advised, identifying those whose loyalty is merely a temporary decoration. The first of these is the discrepancy between the verbal flow and the physiological response. Let us begin. If you recognized your own reactions or past behavioral models in these examples, place a __quote _1_ in the comments. This does not indicate weakness, on the contrary. It is a signal that the process of changing your thinking is beginning. Module 1. Discreteness of the mask and the cognitive gap. Stage. __. Quote _2_ the observation. A spacious office, flooded with the soft light of the setting sun. Julian sits in a deep leather chair, folding his fingers into a __quote _3. Opposite him is Marcus, their potential partner for a new venture project. Julian, I guarantee that our interests coincide completely, Marcus says. His voice sounds confident and steady. We are in the same boat, and I am ready to put my reputation on the line. Julian remains silent. He records a pause of 5 seconds. The pause is too long for a sincere confirmation. Marcus's brain is processing a logical construct rather than transmitting automatic confidence. Marcus leans forward slightly. His right eyebrow rises by a fraction of a millimeter, and the corner of his mouth twitches downward barely noticeably. A micro-expression of contempt mixed with suppressed fear of exposure. The limbic system signals a discrepancy between words and internal state. I'm glad to hear that, Marcus. Julian answers calmly. Internal monologue. Probability of sincerity, less than 10%. Observing the autonomic reaction. Marcus reaches for a glass of water. His fingers tremble slightly when they come into contact with the glass. He takes 1 sip, then a second. An attempt to moisten a parched throat. A classic symptom of sympathetic nervous system activation in response to cognitive dissonance. You seem tense, Julian notes, maintaining complete facial immobility. Perhaps there are details of the contract that cause you discomfort? Oh no, not at all. Marcus places the glass down too quickly. I am simply excited by the scale. Julian notes how the pupils of the interlocutor narrow despite the stable lighting. A rejection reaction. The system recognizes a threat in a direct question. 2. Stage. Psychological scan. System analysis. In this scene, we observe a classic cognitive gap. Marcus transmits a socially approved strategy, loyalty and cooperation. However, his physiology does not keep up with his verbal manipulations. Julian's emotional regulation at this moment works in an active scanning mode. Instead of yielding to social pressure and quote 7, he uses cognitive reappraisal. He does not perceive Marcus's words as truth or lie. He perceives them as input data requiring verification. Marcus's limbic response, the trembling of hands, the micro-expression of contempt, betrays his true position. Contempt in the context of a partnership is a marker of a hidden hierarchical struggle. He does not consider Julian an equal. He considers him an object for manipulation. Julian's brain, having fixed this, suppresses the release of adrenaline through a conscious slowing of the heart rate. He transfers the situation from the plane of trust to the plane of risk analysis. 3. Stage. Scientific validation. To understand this mechanics, one should turn to the research of Paul Ekman, a pioneer in the study of microexpressions. In one of his key experiments, Ekman demonstrated that even trained people, including intelligence officers, are unable to completely control facial muscles when attempting to hide a basic emotion. Microexpressions last from 1/25th to 1/15th of a second. They are a direct consequence of the work of the subcortical structures of the brain, which react faster than the prefrontal cortex manages to form a deceitful mask. In the situation with Marcus, we see exactly this phenomenon. His prefrontal cortex builds a complex strategy of deception, but the limbic system leaks information about his true attitude through micro-movements and autonomic reactions. As Ekman showed, if you see a fleeting emotion that contradicts subsequent words, you should trust exactly the first, the biological reaction. 4. Stage. Strategic protocol. The master key. Never trust a person whose microsignals conflict with their promises. This is the first sign of a social predator who masks their goals as common interests. Control principle number 1. Priority of the nonverbal base. If you record a contradiction between words and the body, looking away, clamped shoulders, micro-contempt, immediately stop the process of emotional rapprochement. Switch to technical interaction mode. Your task is not to expose the liar, but to use their insincerity as a variable in your strategy. Remember, information that you are being lied to is a valuable asset that loses its meaning if you reveal your awareness. 5. Stage. Atmosphere of statics. Julian escorts Marcus to the door. When the oak leaf closes behind the guest, absolute silence reigns in the office. The air seems transparent and cold. Julian returns to the desk, takes a clean sheet of paper, and writes down only one word. Order is restored. The chaos of another's lie could not disrupt his internal geometry. He who showers you with praises you do not deserve either wants to deceive you or hopes to be deceived himself. Niccolò Machiavelli. Module 2. Adaptive Mimicry and Inflation of Recognition 1. Stage. Quote _18 _ the observation. The terrace of a country club surrounded by manicured lawns. Eleonora, a senior partner of the fund, drinks cold tea. Caleb approaches her, a young but extremely ambitious analyst whose performance has recently raised questions. Eleanor, your speech at yesterday's council was not just convincing, it was masterful, Caleb says, bowing his head slightly. I wrote down 5 key points. Your ability to see structure where others see chaos is something I dream of learning. Eleanor records the tilt of his head. Exactly 15 degrees. A posture of submission that is transmitted consciously to lower the vigilance of the dominant individual. Thank you, Caleb. Which specific points seem most applicable to you? She asks calmly. Caleb freezes for a second. His eyelids perform a series of rapid blinks, 3 times in a row. A search reflex of the brain. He did not expect a clarifying question and is now feverishly generating an answer that corresponds to his previous flattery. Oh, especially the one concerning the decentralization of risk. He finds his footing quickly, but his palm simultaneously performs a stroking movement along his thigh. A self-soothing gesture indicating a high level of internal discomfort when attempting to falsify data. Eleonora notices how Caleb throws a quick, barely perceptible glance at Marcus, the HR director passing by. Checking social distance, the object seeks confirmation of his significance from other centers of power. Interesting, Eleanor says. But I did not mention the decentralization of risks yesterday. I spoke about the consolidation of assets. Caleb's smile freezes, turning into a mask. The muscles around his eyes remain motionless, while the corners of his lips are still stretched. The real emotion of joy or admiration always involves the orbicular muscle of the eye. the absence of underscore underscore. Quote underscore 20, underscore underscore during a smile is a sure sign of simulation. 2. Stage, underscore underscore. Quote underscore 21, underscore underscore, system analysis. In the second module, we consider the mechanism of social mimicry and excessive flattery. Caleb demonstrates the second thing that Machiavelli considered a sign of dangerous instability, a readiness to change one's truth to please a strong player. His brain works in a mode of cognitive conformity. He does not strive for an objective analysis of Eleonora's speech. His goal is to create a dopamine loop in the interlocutor, using flattery as an instrument of bribery. However, the discrepancy between his words and the facts, the error in the topic of the speech, reveals functional blindness. The manipulator is so focused on the process of seduction that he ignores the content of reality. Eleonora, applying cognitive flexibility, does not enter into conflict. She only notes the underscore, underscore, quote underscore, 23, underscore, underscore. She understands that a person who betrays facts so easily for the sake of favor will just as easily betray the person themselves when a more profitable figure appears on the horizon. His loyalty is not an ethical category, but a current market rate. 3. Stage, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 24, underscore, underscore. For a deep understanding of this type of behavior, it is worth considering Solomon Asch's experiments on conformity. During the study, a subject was asked to compare the length of lines on cards. Confederates, the group, intentionally gave incorrect answers. The results showed that 75% of participants agreed with the obviously false opinion of the group at least once in order not to stand out or to please the majority. In Caleb's behavior, we see an extreme form of this effect. He is ready to confirm any quote underscore 25 quote of the leader, even if it contradicts his own perception. For quote underscore 26 quote, this is a signal. A conformist is a potential traitor, as his behavior is dictated not by an internal core, but by the external environment. If the environment changes, he will change along with it. 4. Stage, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 27, underscore, underscore the master key. Never trust someone who agrees with you in everything, especially if this agreement is accompanied by delight. This is a sign that the person sees in you not a personality, but a resource. Control principle number 2. Filter of excessive recognition. When receiving praise, always perform a quote underscore 28. Ask a clarifying question that requires knowledge of details. If the interlocutor falters or demonstrates micro-expressions of fear, you are dealing with an adaptive manipulator. Your strategy: keep such people on the periphery. They are useful as indicators of your current status, but they are the first who will leave you in a zone of turbulence. 5. Stage, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 29, underscore, underscore Eleonora takes a small sip of tea. The ice in the glass tinkles quietly, creating a clear rhythmic sound. She looks at the horizon, where the sky meets the forest line. Caleb says something quickly, trying to fix the awkwardness. But for Eleonora, he has become as transparent as this glass. His words no longer have weight. They have turned into background noise that she has learned to cut off with a single effort of will. In her world, only clarity remains. People are so simple-minded and so absorbed in current needs that a deceiver will always find someone who will let himself be seduced. Niccolò Machiavelli. Module 3. Diffusion of confidentiality and transactional espionage. 1. Stage. Quote 30. The observation. The dimmed light of an expensive steakhouse. A table for two in a corner where the acoustics absorb extra sounds. Julian sits opposite Marcus. Before them are 2 glasses of red wine and 1 shared plate of appetizers. "Julian, just between us." Marcus lowers his voice to a whisper, leaning forward. His elbows rest on the tablecloth, violating the boundaries of personal space. "Eleanor has serious problems with the audit. They say she hid losses on the last 3 deals. I saw the report. It is a catastrophe." Marcus looks intently into Julian's eyes, trying to catch a response. An attempt to establish a connection through a secret, a classic manipulation to create a false sense of closeness. Julian takes 1 slow breath. His face remains motionless. He notices how Marcus licks his lips and quickly looks around before continuing, a sign of a high cortisol level. Marcus realizes he is committing a betrayal of trust, and his brain scans the environment for witnesses. "This is valuable information, Marcus," Julian says in an even tone. Internal monologue. "The object uses someone else's vulnerability as currency. The probability that my data will become his next lot for sale is 100%. Marcus nods contentedly, believing he has bought Julian's loyalty. He begins to describe the details of Eleanor's failure, gesturing actively with his right hand. His index finger periodically points in the direction of an invisible opponent. The gesture of the pointing finger in the absence of an opponent betrays deeply hidden aggression and a desire to dominate at the expense of someone else's fall. 2. Stage ___ quote _34 __ system analysis. In this scene, we dissect the third thing that Machiavelli considered fatal to trust, the transmission of others' secrets. Marcus uses a mechanism of social exchange where information is traded just like a commodity. His behavior is dictated by a desire to raise his status in Julian's eyes. Marcus's brain erroneously believes that sharing forbidden knowledge creates a strong alliance. However, from the point of view of social hierarchy, the one who brings you the head of your mutual acquaintance demonstrates the absence of an internal ethical filter. Julian applies cognitive isolation. He does not allow himself to become emotionally involved in the dirty news. Instead, he classifies Marcus as an information carrier with a low degree of reliability. In Julian's system, Marcus is no longer a partner. He is a vulnerable link who, at the slightest pressure or profit, will give up Julian's own data. 3. Stage scientific validation. To analyze this type of behavior, it is appropriate to recall the research of evolutionary biologist Robin Dunbar on the nature of gossip. Dunbar argued that gossip for humans is an analog of social grooming in primates. It is a way to maintain connections in large groups. However, modern psychology, in particular works on the study of the dark triad, narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, points to a critical difference. If ordinary grooming is aimed at strengthening the group, then strategic gossip, which we see in Marcus, is aimed at destroying the structure for the sake of personal gain. Experiments in the field of game theory, in particular the repeated prisoner's dilemma, show that players who are prone to desertion and passing information about others win in the short term, but inevitably lead the system to collapse. Marcus is a, quote, 42 whose survival strategy is built on the betrayal of confidentiality. 4. Stage ___ quote _43 __ the master key. Never trust a person who opens up the secrets of those who consider him their friend. Remember, you are next on his list to quote 44 control principle number 3, the rule of mirror secrecy. When someone brings you confidential information about a third party, perceive it not as a quote 45, but as a quote 46 act according to the protocol. 1. Thank them for the information neutrally without giving your assessments. 2. Never share anything with this person that can be used against you. 3. Reduce the distance to the level of formal protocol. Your goal is to become a quote 47 for him, from which it is impossible to extract data. A leadership position is maintained only where your boundaries are impenetrable to gossips. 5. Stage, underscore, underscore. Quote underscore 48, underscore Julian. Places the utensils on the plate parallel to each other. Perfect geometry of steel on white porcelain. The waiter silently removes the dishes. At this moment, Julian feels the absolute transparency of the interlocutor's intentions. Marcus continues to speak, but his voice seems distant and unimportant. Julian controls the space because he controls the flow of information. In his head, there is only the clarity and order of cold calculation. He who relies least on the fortune of fate holds on to power the longest. Niccolò Machiavelli. Module 4. Erosion of pressure and the cognitive buffer 1. Stage. The scenario, the observation. A meeting room on the 40th floor. Glass walls reflect the gray sky of the metropolis. Caleb, whose project has just been harshly criticized, stands up abruptly, pushing back a heavy chair with an unpleasant screech. "This is absurd, Julian." Caleb's voice breaks in sharp, high tones. "You are intentionally blocking the team's initiative. These are personal scores, and everyone here understands that." He strikes his palm against the polished surface of the table. The sound is dry and loud. Caleb breathes heavily, his nostrils flare, and a pulsating vein is clearly visible on his neck. A classic fight-or-flight reaction caused by an acute sense of loss of social status. Julian does not change his posture. He continues to sit, leaning back slightly. His hands rest calmly on the armrests. He fixes his gaze on the bridge of Caleb's nose. This is a more neutral point than a direct quote 51 duel. Maintaining eye contact without aggression deprives the attacker of the expected emotional fuel. "Caleb, I hear your indignation," Julian says. His voice sounds quieter than usual, forcing those around him to fall silent and listen. "However, let us separate your interpretation of my motives from the actual profitability indicators. You have 3 minutes to provide arguments in favor of the latter." Julian notices how Caleb's jaw tightens, an attempt to suppress verbal aggression which transitions into a muscular clamp. The prefrontal cortex is trying to regain control over the limbic system. Caleb slowly lowers himself into his seat, but his shoulders remain raised, a sign of a continuing high level of cortisol. 2. Stage. Psychological scan. System analysis. In this situation, we observe an attempt at verbal dominance through open aggression. Caleb uses shouting and abrupt movements as tools for regaining control over the territory. His brain is in a state of amygdala hijack. The emotional center has blocked rational thinking. Julian applies the tactic of a cognitive buffer. Instead of responding with mirror aggression, which would lead to an escalation of the conflict, or submitting, which would destroy his leadership position, he uses emotional dissociation. He observes Caleb's anger as an external physical process, similar to rain or wind. Lowering the volume of the voice is a powerful tool for de-escalation. From a biological point of view, the quiet and calm voice of a leader in a moment of crisis signals to the pack that the threat is under control. Julian forcibly transfers the interaction from the emotional register to the rational one, engaging the logical centers of the interlocutor's brain. 3. Stage. Scientific validation. To explain this mechanics, it is necessary to consider the phenomenon of amygdala hijack, described by Daniel Goleman. In moments of strong stress, the amygdala sends a signal that bypasses the rational parts of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, forcing us to react impulsively. Research shows that between the stimulus, Caleb's shout, and the reaction, Julian's answer, there exists a gap of approximately 6 seconds. If a person manages to realize their reaction within this time, blood returns to the prefrontal cortex and rational control is restored. Julian masterfully uses these seconds of pause, allowing Caleb's quote 57 to begin to break down before giving an answer. He does not fight the opponent's anger. He gives it space so that it exhausts itself. 4. Stage. Strategic protocol. The master key. Never allow an aggressor to dictate the pace and tone of the dialogue. The one who maintains silence and immobility when others shout takes power over the situation. Control principle number 4. The 6-second rule. When encountering open aggression, perform the following protocol. 1. Fix the micro-movements of the aggressor, flaring of nostrils, tilt of the torso. This will transfer your brain from victim mode to analyst mode. 2. Make a pause of 6 seconds before uttering the first word. During this time, focus on the sensation of support under your feet. 3. Respond 30% quieter than usual. This will force the aggressor to fall silent to hear you and will automatically lower his level of arousal. 4. Reformulate the claim into a technical task. Replace. You offended me. With what problem are we solving now? 5. Stage. Atmosphere of statics. Julian takes a pen and makes a note in a notebook. The movement is smooth and calculated. It becomes so quiet in the hall that the hum of the air conditioning system is audible. Caleb looks at his hands lying on the table. The tension in the air has not disappeared, but it has ceased to be chaotic. Now it is the tension of focused work. Julian closes the notebook. Order is restored through silence. A wise prince should devise ways by which his citizens will always and under all circumstances have need of the state and of himself. Niccolò Machiavelli. Module 5. Architecture of the Invisible Choice 1. Stage. The scenario. The observation. A city park in the middle of a working day. The paths are sprinkled with fine gravel, which crunches steadily underfoot. Julian strolls with Marcus. The latter is excited. He is considering the possibility of an aggressive takeover of a competing firm, which involves huge risks for their common capital. This is a chance that comes once in 10 years, Julian, Marcus says, walking with wide strides. If we do not strike now, we will remain in secondary roles. Julian does not argue. He adapts to Marcus's step, exactly copying his rhythm. The quote, _65, __. Synchronization of movements creates subconscious trust and a sense of security in the interlocutor. Certainly, the scale of the project is impressive, Julian says calmly. Internal monologue, __, quote, _66, __. After 2 minutes of walking, Julian begins to gradually slow down the pace of his step. He does this so smoothly that Marcus, unconsciously continuing the synchronization, also slows down. Soon they are no longer running, but slowly drifting along the alley. Marcus. Julian stops at a bench and looks at the tops of the trees rather than at the interlocutor. Imagine that we have already taken this step. 5 months have passed. The board of directors demands a report on liquidity, and our main reserves are frozen in lawsuits of the acquired company. What is your first action at this point? Marcus freezes. His gaze becomes defocused. He looks into the void. Transition from the emotional mode of quote, _67, __, to the mode of quote, _68, __. Marcus's left eyelid twitches barely noticeably, a sign of cognitive tension. The brain has encountered the need to process a negative scenario that was previously ignored. I did not think about 5 months. I thought about the first week, Marcus admits. His voice has lost its previous sharpness. 2. Stage. Psychological scan. System analysis. In this scene, Julian demonstrates management through social synchronization and negative priming. He does not use direct prohibitions, which would have caused a resistance to the dominant reaction in Marcus. Instead, he uses cognitive flexibility to redirect the partner's attention. First, Julian establishes rapport through physical mirroring. This lowers the level of critical perception in Marcus. Then, using the slowing of the walking pace, Julian forcibly lowers the interlocutor's heart rate. Biology dictates to the psyche a transition to a more contemplative state. The final blow is delivered through a question that creates the illusion of an accomplished fact. Julian does not ask, "What if we lose?" He asks, "What will you do when we are already in a crisis?" This forces Marcus's prefrontal cortex to instantly switch from limbic excitement to analytical survival. 3. Stage. Quote, _73, __. The described method is based on the classic study by Tanya Chartrand and John Barr, quote 74, 1999. The experiment showed that people unconsciously imitate the postures, gestures, and facial expressions of their interlocutors. Researchers discovered that such mimicry is __, quote _75, __. Moreover, the one who consciously manages this process gains the opportunity to change the psycho-emotional state of another person. If you begin to transmit calmness and slowness after a period of synchronization, your interlocutor will, with a probability of 75%, follow you without even noticing it. This allows for quote _76, aggressive or excited states, returning the opponent to the field of rational discussion. 4. Stage. Quote _77, the master key. True influence does not need loud orders. It is built on managing the context in which another person makes a decision. Control principle number 5, leading synchronization. To guide a person to the decision you need, use a 3-step protocol. 1. Joining. For 3 to 5 minutes, completely copy the pace of speech, posture, and rhythm of breathing of the interlocutor. 2. Breaking. Begin to gradually reduce the intensity of your movements and the volume of your voice. Wait until the object quote 78 following you. 3. Vector implementation. Ask a question in the quote 79 format, focusing attention on the details of that scenario, which is advantageous to you or which requires a sober assessment. Remember, a person more willingly defends that idea which he considers the fruit of his own reflections. Your task is merely to arrange the lighting in the labyrinth of his thoughts. 5. Stage. Julian and Marcus continue to stand by the bench. The wind barely stirs the foliage, creating a monotonous, soothing noise. Marcus takes a deep breath. His shoulders finally drop. The world around seems crystal clear. In this silence, there is no place for impulsive mistakes, only pure space for making a balanced decision. Julian nods slightly to his thoughts. The system is brought into balance again. No one can wear a mask long enough. A lie soon returns to its true nature. Niccolò Machiavelli, Module 6. Genesis of Hidden Hostility and Deconstruction of Guilt 1. Stage. Quote _81, the observation dinner at a country house. The light of the lamps is soft. There are 2 plates on the table. Eleanor has just finished the story of her successful closing of a deal that took her 3 months of intensive work. Caleb slowly cuts a steak. His movements are deliberately neat. "This is amazing, Eleonora," he says, without raising his eyes. "It is surprising how you managed to maintain such a concentration on your career when the house has practically turned into a hotel." I do not even remember when we last had dinner without your phone on the table. He places the fork down. The metal strikes the porcelain with a barely perceptible but sharp sound. Caleb smiles, but his lips are tightly pressed, and the nasolabial folds are deepened. Hidden aggression masked as concern for the relationship. The use of guilt as a lever for restoring a shaken dominance. Eleonora pauses for 4 seconds. She records how Caleb slightly pulls his shoulders back, increasing the distance. A subconscious desire to fence oneself off after the delivered underscore quote, _82 __. Do you believe that my professional success comes at the expense of our personal life? She asks calmly. Internal monologue, __, quote, _83 __. Oh no, not at all. I simply admire your endurance. Caleb emphasizes the last word, accompanying it with a quick glance up and to the left, a sign of constructing a false justification and suppressed irritation. 2. Stage, __, quote, _84 __, system analysis. In this scene, we encounter passive aggression, one of the most destructive forms of social interaction. Caleb does not attack directly, as this would destroy his image as a, quote, 85 instead. He uses emotional blackmail, appealing to a sense of guilt. His brain at this moment experiences cognitive dissonance. He should be happy for Eleonora's success, but his own ego is wounded by her achievements. To release this tension, he commits a microaggression. Eleonora applies metacognition. She does not allow herself to fall into guilt. She realizes that Caleb's accusation is not an objective truth, but his way of dealing with internal insecurity through an attempt to downplay the significance of the partner. 3. Stage, __, quote, _87 __. To understand this mechanism, let us turn to the research of Dr. John Gottman, who for 40 years studied the psychology of human relationships. Gottman identified behavioral patterns that predict the degradation of connections with an accuracy of 90%. In Caleb's behavior, we see elements of contempt masked as irony. Gottman proved that contempt is a hierarchical attitude. He who expresses contempt subconsciously places himself above the other. In The Mechanics of Self-Control, this is a critical point. If you allow passive aggression to remain unnoticed, you voluntarily give up the leadership position in the relationship, allowing the manipulator to form your reality through a sense of inferiority. 4. Stage, strategic protocol, the master key. Never make excuses in response to passive aggression. An excuse is an admission of guilt, which gives the manipulator absolute power over your emotional state. Control principle number 6, legalization of the hidden. To neutralize a soft attack, use the following 3-step algorithm. 1. Disclosure of context. Ask a direct, clarifying question about the hidden meaning of what was said. Do you mean to say that I devote insufficient time to the house? This forcibly brings the aggressor out of the shadow, into the light of direct responsibility for their words. 2. Absence of emotional feedback. Maintain the timbre of the voice on one note, avoiding apologetic intonations. Your task is to show that the virus of guilt has not found a suitable environment in you for reproduction. 3. Setting a boundary. If, after disclosing the context, the person continues to equivocate, use the formula. I am ready to discuss facts and schedules, but not your hints. Remember, boundaries in personal relationships are protected as cold-bloodedly as in professional ones. Without boundaries, respect transforms into exploitation. 5. Stage, atmosphere of statics. Eleonora neatly places the napkin on the table. Silence remains in the room, interrupted only by the steady ticking of the wall clock. She does not feel anger, only a clear understanding of the structure of the moment. Caleb looks into his plate, realizing that his maneuver did not succeed. The situation has crystallized. In this clarity, Eleanor gains full freedom of action. Order is restored through honesty before oneself and a refusal to play by others' rules. He who wants to succeed in everything must change his behavior depending on the circumstances. Niccolò Machiavelli. Module 7. Entropy of Collapse in the Algorithm of Revival 1. Stage, __, quote _96, __, the observation, midnight. Julian's office on the 54th floor has turned into an island of cold light in the middle of a dark city. On a huge monitor, 2 numbers in red glow, recording the collapse of the quotes of the main asset. Caleb stands by the panoramic window. His reflection in the glass seems blurry and shaky. "This is the end, Julian." Caleb's voice sounds muffled. Overtones of defeat are heard in it. "We have lost 90% of liquidity over the last 3 hours. Tomorrow morning, the board of directors will initiate the removal procedure." Julian sits at the desk, his back perfectly straight. He does not look at the graphs. His gaze is fixed on a thin crack on the marble penholder. Internal fixation on a micro detail is a way of grounding during a large-scale external chaos. Julian takes a slow breath that lasts exactly 4 seconds and an equally long exhale. His pulse, barely noticeable on the carotid artery, slows down. Conscious management of the parasympathetic system. __, quote _97, __, is an evaluative judgment, Caleb, Julian says. His voice is devoid of any emotional coloring. It sounds like an audio recording of a technical regulation. Let us operate with data. We have 10% of liquidity left and 6 hours until the exchange opens. Caleb turns around abruptly. His pupils are dilated. His face is pale. Sympathetic hyperactivation. The brain is blocked by fear. Cognitive functions are narrowed to a single point, the catastrophe. "What data are you talking about?" Caleb takes 2 steps toward the desk. "We will be destroyed." Julian stands up smoothly. His movements are devoid of haste. He takes a clean sheet of paper and draws 1 vertical line in the center. A physical gesture of structuring chaos. On the left, we will write down what is lost irretrievably. On the right, those levers that are still within our jurisdiction. Analysis of probabilities is more important than an inventory of losses. 2. Stage, __, quote _98, system analysis. At a moment of total crisis, the brain of an ordinary person enters a state of cognitive paralysis. Caleb demonstrates a typical reaction. His prefrontal cortex is disabled, and the amygdala transmits the signal __, quote _99, __. In such a state, any attempt at action leads to fatal errors, as the choice is dictated by fear, not by strategy. Julian applies the highest form of self-control, radical acceptance and cognitive deconstruction. He does not quote 100 the fact of the collapse. He accepts it as a new baseline setting of reality. His brain switches from quote 101 mode to quote 102 mode. The use of sensory grounding, focus on the crack in the holder, and respiratory control allows Julian to bypass the stage of panic. He artificially expands his refractory period, the time between receiving shocking information and forming an answer. While Caleb is inside the emotional storm, Julian observes this storm from the side, maintaining emotional dissociation. 3. Stage, __, quote _103, __. To understand why some people give up while others find a way out in a hopeless situation, it is necessary to turn to the theory of learned helplessness, developed by Martin Seligman. During his classic experiments, Seligman discovered that if a living being is subjected to a negative influence that it cannot control, it eventually stops making attempts to escape, even when such an opportunity appears. The brain literally, quote, _104, quote, _ to be powerless. However, later, Seligman identified a group of subjects possessing cognitive optimism, not to be confused with naive faith in the best. These people perceive failure not as permanent and all-encompassing, __, quote, _105, but as temporary and specific, __, quote, _106, Julian demonstrates exactly this pattern. He isolates the problem, not allowing it to infect the entire picture of the world. He destroys learned helplessness through an immediate transition to micro-actions that return to him a sense of control. 4. Stage, quote, 107, the master key. Never trust your brain in the first 10 minutes after receiving catastrophic news. Your first reaction is biological trash designed for survival in the jungle, not in the boardroom. Control principle number 7, the anti-fragility algorithm. Upon the occurrence of a crisis of any scale, follow the __, quote, _108, protocol. 1. 7 minutes of silence. Forbid yourself any words and actions. Use this time for normalizing breathing. 2. 7 facts. Write down 7 indisputable facts about the current situation, purified of emotions. Not quote 109, but quote 110. 3. 7 steps. Define 7 minimal actions that you can take in the next hour to regain agency, even if it is simply a call to a lawyer or ordering coffee. Your task is not to save everything at once, but to launch the process of cognitive reboot. A leader is one who remains conscious when others are in a coma of despair. 5. Stage. Julian puts the pen aside. On the sheet of paper, there is now a clear list of tasks. Dawn begins to break outside the window, coloring the sky a steel color. Caleb, looking at Julian's calmness, involuntarily straightens his back and takes his tablet. The air in the office seems frosty and perfectly clean. The problem has not disappeared, but it has been transformed into a working project. In this silence, Julian feels not triumph, but a deep mathematical satisfaction. The mechanics of self-control has completed its cycle. Order is restored. This concludes our journey through the architecture of human reactions. Remember, the world is not a chaos of random emotions, but a strict geometric structure where every movement has its own vector and price. True greatness lies not in crushing the opponent, but in becoming the only point of immobility in the center of any storm. When you understand the mechanics, fear disappears, leaving room for pure, transparent will. Your internal statics is your highest power. Be the architects of your own calmness, and then reality will inevitably submit to your calculation. He who understands the mechanisms of the psyche gains real freedom. Subscribe to analyze the hidden laws of human behavior together. And be sure to write in the comments which strategy to analyze in the next issue.